The transport ship shuddered as it docked with Station Kepler, and Danny Cross grabbed his duffel bag from the overhead compartment, while other passengers pushed toward the exit like they were escaping a fire. He had spent 6 months in cryo-sleep, traveling from Earth to this remote station on the edge of known space, and his body still felt heavy and slow, like he was moving through water. The other passengers were mostly military personnel and corporate executives who had places to be and people waiting for them, but Danny was just a maintenance technician being transferred because someone somewhere decided that was what needed to happen. He stepped off the transport into the main terminal and immediately noticed something was different about this station compared to the others he had worked on. The air smelled strange, like ozone, mixed with something organic, and the walls had a blue tint to them instead of the usual gray metal. There were more aliens here too, walking alongside humans. In the corridors, Danny had seen plenty of aliens before because humanity had been part of the galactic community for almost 20 years now. But most stations kept different species separated in their own quarters to avoid incidents. Station Kepler apparently did things differently. He made his way through the crowd toward the customs checkpoint where he needed to register his arrival and get his quarters assignment. That was when he saw her. She stood near the checkpoint looking completely lost, while people flowed around her in a wide circle like water around a rock. She was tall and slim with skin that had a pale blue tint, like moonlight on snow, and her ears came to sharp, elegant points that poked through silver hair that fell past her waist in waves. Her eyes were too large for a human face, and they glowed with a soft violet light that made Danny think of bioluminescent creatures in deep oceans. She wore clothing that looked like it was made from some kind of scaled leather dyed in shades of purple and black, and it fit her like armor. But the most striking thing about her was not her appearance. It was the 2 dragons coiled at her feet. They were each about the size of a large wolf with scales that shimmered between purple and black depending on how the light hit them. Their eyes glowed the same violet as the elf woman, and they watched the crowd with an intensity that made Danny think of hunting cats waiting for prey to come close enough. Every person in the terminal was giving the elf and her dragons a wide berth. Some people stared with obvious fear while others whispered to their companions and pointed. A few security guards stood nearby with their hands near their weapons, but they did not approach. The elf seemed aware of the attention, and it made her shoulders tense and her movements uncertain. She kept trying to interact with a scanning panel near the checkpoint, but her fingers hovered over the screen like she was afraid to touch it. One of the dragons made a low rumbling sound that Danny felt in his chest more than heard. The elf reached down and placed her hand on the dragon head, and the rumbling stopped. Danny watched this for a moment, and then looked at the customs line where at least 30 people were waiting. He looked back at the elf who was still struggling with the scanner. He made a decision that probably was not smart but felt right. He walked straight toward her. The crowd seemed to hold its breath as he crossed the empty space. Around the elf, one of the dragons raised its head and fixed its glowing eyes on him. The elf turned and saw him approaching, and her expression shifted from confusion to alarm. She said something in a language that sounded like wind chimes and bells. Danny stopped a few feet away and gestured at the scanner. "Need help with that?" he asked. The elf stared at him like he had just appeared out of thin air. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Both dragons were watching him now, and their nostrils flared as they took in his scent. Danny could feel the weight of their attention, and some part of his brain was screaming that he should back away slowly, but he had worked with enough dangerous machinery to know that showing fear usually made things worse. "You are speaking to me," the elf finally said in accented but clear English. Her voice had a musical quality that made even simple words sound like part of a song. "Yeah," Danny said, because who else would I be talking to? He stepped closer to the scanner, and the dragon on the left shifted its weight but did not move to block him. Danny reached out and tapped the screen in the sequence he had memorized from the station orientation materials they had given him on the transport. The scanner blinked green and displayed a welcome message. "There you go," he said. "All set." The elf looked at the screen, then back at him, then at the screen again like she could not believe what had just happened. "You helped me?" she said. Danny shrugged because it seemed like a strange thing to point out. "It was just a scanner," he said, "and those things are confusing when you first arrive." The elf continued to stare at him, and her expression was difficult to read. "You are not afraid. she said finally. Of what? Danny asked. He looked down, at the dragons who were still watching him with unblinking eyes. Your dragons, he said, seem pretty calm. The dragon on the right made a sound that might have been a snort, or might have been a laugh. Pretty calm. The elf repeated like she was testing. The words, yeah, Danny said. And they have not tried to eat me, so I figure we are good. The elf blinked several times and then something changed in her face. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly and her expression softened. Am Kalith, she said, and these are Vera. And Sorndy gestured to each dragon as she spoke their names. Danny Cross, he replied, and nice to meet you all. He started to turn toward the customs line, but her voice stopped him. Wait. He looked back. You spoke to me as an equal, Kalith said, and you touched the machine I was using without fear that I would attack you. Danny frowned because he was not sure what else he would have done. Why would I be afraid of you helping you with a scanner? He asked. Kalith looked down at her dragons, and they both made soft chirping sounds. When she looked back up at Danny, her eyes seemed even brighter, because most humans either run from us or surround us with weapons, Kalith said. And in the 3 months I have been traveling through your space, no one has simply offered help. Danny thought about that and realized it probably made sense from a certain perspective. Humanity had a long history of being terrible to anything that seemed different. That sounds exhausting, he said. It is, Kalith agreed. Danny glanced at the customs line, which had somehow gotten even longer. Look, he said, I have been in cryo for 6 months and I really need to get processed and find my quarters. But if you need more help, I can stick around for a few minutes. You would do that? Kalith asked. There was something in her tone that made Danny realize this was probably a bigger deal to her than it seemed to him. Sure, he said, why not? Kalith looked at him for a long moment, and then she smiled. It was the first time Danny had seen her smile, and it transformed her entire face. She looked younger and less guarded, and the glow in her eyes seemed warmer. I would appreciate that, she said. Danny nodded and walked over to the customs checkpoint with Kalith and her dragons following. Behind him, he could feel every eye in the terminal watching them, but he ignored it because he had work to do, and standing around worrying about what other people thought had never been his style. The customs officer was a middle-aged woman named Officer Chen according to her name tag, and her eyes went wide when she saw Danny approaching with the elf, sir. She said, you should not be that close to the Velori. The what? Danny asked. The elf woman, Officer Chen said, and her dragons are classified as potentially dangerous. Danny looked back at Kalith, who had stopped a few feet away, and her expression had gone carefully neutral again. She does not seem dangerous to me, Danny said, and she just needs help with processing. Officer Chen looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Danny's expression must have changed her mind. She sighed and pulled up a different screen. Fine, she said. But if something happens, it is on you. Nothing is going to happen. Danny said. He turned back to Kalith and gestured for her to come forward. Kalith approached slowly with her dragons moving like shadows at her sides. Officer Chen walked her through the processing system, while Danny stood nearby and answered questions when Kalith seemed confused about human terminology. It took about 15 minutes, and by the end, Officer Chen seemed less nervous, though she still kept a careful distance from the dragons. Kalith received her temporary residence card and a map of the station projected onto her datapad. Thank you, Kalith said to Officer Chen, and then she turned to Danny. And thank you, she said again, and her voice was softer. No problem, Danny replied. He got his own processing done quickly since he had done it dozens of times before, and then he stepped aside to let the next person in line move forward. Kalith was waiting for him near the exit from the customs area. I need to find Residential Wing 7, she said, but I do not understand the map. Danny pulled out his own datapad and checked the station directory. I'm in Maintenance Wing B, he said. So we are actually going in the same direction, and I can show you. Kalith smiled again, and Danny found himself smiling back. They started walking through the station together, while her dragons padded silently beside them, and Danny wondered what exactly he had just gotten himself into. They walked through the main corridor of Station Kepler, and people moved out of their way like they were carrying a contagious disease. Danny noticed but tried not to let it bother him, because he had learned a long time ago that most people were afraid of things they did not understand. Kalith noticed too, and her posture became more rigid with each person who backed away or crossed to the other side of the hall. Her dragons, Vera and Sorn, seemed to sense her discomfort because they pressed closer to her legs and made low rumbling sounds that Danny felt through the floor. "Does this happen everywhere you go?" Danny asked. Kalith glanced at him, and there was something sad in her expression. "Yes," she said. "And on some stations it is worse." "People throw things?" Danny asked. "Sometimes," Kalith said, "and sometimes they just scream or call for security." She paused near a window that looked out into space, and the light from distant stars reflected in her eyes. On one station, she continued, "A group of human children approached me." Danny felt his stomach tighten because he could guess where this was going. "What happened?" he asked. "Their parents pulled them away," Kalith said, "and told them I was dangerous." She looked down at her dragons who were sitting patiently at her feet, but the children did not look afraid, she said, and they looked curious. They wanted to meet Vera and Sorn. Danny said, "Yes." Kalith replied, "And I wanted to let them." Her voice had gone quiet, and Danny realized this was something that bothered her more than the people who were openly hostile. "Kids are usually smarter than adults," Danny said, "and they have not learned to be afraid of things, just because they are different." Kalith looked at him with surprise. "You believe that?" she asked. "I know that," Danny said, "and when I was a kid my best friend was a Thalon." "What is a Thalon?" Kalith asked. "They are a species from the Andromeda sector," Danny explained, "and they look kind of like giant mantis insects with 6 arms and compound eyes." He smiled at the memory. "Everyone told me I should stay away from him because Thalons were supposed to be aggressive and territorial, but he was just a kid like me who wanted someone to play with." "What happened to him?" Kalith asked. Danny shrugged, but kept smiling. "He is an engineer now working on Mars, and we still message each other every few months." Kalith studied his face like she was trying to understand something. "You are different from other humans," she said. Danny laughed. "I really am not," he said. "And I just think life is too short to spend it being afraid." They continued walking and entered a lift that would take them to the residential levels. The lift was empty, except for them. And Danny noticed Kalith seemed to relax slightly without other people around. "How long have you had Vera and Sorn?" Danny asked. "Since they hatched," Kalith said. She reached down and stroked Vera's head, and the dragon made a pleased chirping sound. "In my culture," she explained, "dragons choose their companions before they are born." "The eggs call to us," Danny asked in a way, Kalith said, "and I heard their song when I was very young, and I knew they were meant for me." "That sounds amazing." Danny said. "It is," Kalith agreed, "and they are my family." The lift doors opened onto a corridor that was much nicer than the industrial areas Danny was used to. There were actual plants growing in planters along the walls, and the lighting was softer and warmer. "This must be the fancy section," Danny said. Kalith looked around with interest. "It is beautiful," she said. They walked down the hall checking door numbers until they found Residential Wing 7. "This should be it," Danny said. Kalith looked at the door and then back at him. "Thank you," she said. "And I do not know what I would have done without your help." "You would have figured it out," Danny said. "And you seem pretty capable." Kalith smiled, and it was that same warm smile that transformed her face. "Most humans would not say that," she said. "Then most humans are not paying attention," Danny replied. He started to turn away, but then remembered something his mother used to say about making people feel welcome in new places. "Hey," he said, "if you need anything else or just want someone to show you around the station, I am in maintenance. Wing B, room 42. Kalith's eyes went wide. "You would want to see me again?" she asked. Danny shrugged because it seemed obvious to him. "Yeah," he said. "And you seem nice, and your dragons are pretty cool." He reached out without really thinking about it and patted Sorn on the head like the dragon was a large dog. Sorn's scales were warm under his palm and had a texture like smooth stone. The dragon leaned into his touch and made a rumbling sound that might have been a purr. "Thanks, love," I said casually and turned to go. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Kalith froze completely and her face went through about 5 different expressions in the span of 2 seconds. Her dragons both sat down hard and made sounds that Danny could have sworn were shocked. Chirp's Kaleth's mouth opened and closed twice before she found words. "What did you call me?" she asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Danny replayed what he had said in his head and realized he had used one of those casual terms that people back home used without thinking. "Oh," he said. "And sorry. That is just something people say where I come from. It does not really mean anything specific." He added. Kaleth continued to stare at him, and one of her hands had moved to her chest like she was trying to calm her heartbeat. "In my language," she said carefully. "That word is not casual." Danny felt heat rising in his face because he was starting to realize he might have just said something very significant by accident. "What does it mean?" he asked quietly. Kaleth looked down at her dragons and then back up at him. "It means," she said, "the person you would bond your life to." She took a breath before continuing. "It means the person you would stand beside until the stars go dark and the universe grows." Cold, Danny stood, very still, because that was definitely not what he meant, but also he was not sure how to take it back without making things worse. "I did not know," he said, "and I am sorry if I said something wrong." Kaleth shook her head. Slowly, "You did not say something wrong," she said. "But you said something impossible. Why impossible?" Danny asked. "Because in my world," Kaleth said, "that word is sacred. It is spoken only once in a lifetime, and only to the one you choose above all others." She looked at him with those glowing, violet eyes, and Danny could see confusion and wonder and something else he could not quite name. "And humans have been many things to my people," she continued, "but never that." They stood in the corridor looking at each other while her dragons watched. With what seemed like fascination, Danny could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, and he was aware that he should probably say something, but his brain was not offering anything useful. Finally, he took a breath and decided that honesty was probably his best option. "Look," he said, "I do not know much about your culture, and I definitely did not mean to say something so important by accident." He met her eyes and tried to find the right words. "But what I can tell you is that where I come from, we try to treat everyone with basic respect and kindness. Because life is hard enough," he continued, "without making it harder for each other." Kaleth's expression shifted again, and this time she smiled, but it was different from before. This smile was softer and more genuine, and it reached her eyes. "Perhaps," she said, "that is why the myths could never decide what humans were." "What do you mean?" Danny asked. "In my world," Kaleth explained, "humans are myths. We did not know you existed until we met your kind in the stars, and in our stories," she continued, "you are either gods who create and destroy worlds or monsters who consume everything they touch. We could never agree which you were." Kaleth said. Danny thought about that and about humanity history and about all the terrible and wonderful things his species had done. "Maybe we are both," he said. Kaleth nodded slowly. "That is what I have learned," she said. "And you are capable of great cruelty and great kindness often at the same time." She looked down at her dragons and then back at him. "But you," she said, "are the first human to show me kindness without wanting something in return. I am just tired and trying to get to my quarters." Danny said, "And helping you was easier than not helping you." Kaleth laughed. "And it was a sound like bells," she said, "and that is what I mean. Only a human would describe kindness as the path of least resistance." Danny found himself laughing too. "When you put it that way, it sounds pretty bad," he said. "It is not bad," Kaleth said, "and it is honest." She stepped closer and her dragons moved with her. "You asked if I wanted you to show me around the station," she said. "Yeah," Danny replied. "I would like that very much," Kaleth said, "and I would like to understand humans better." She smiled again and added, "And I would like to understand you better, Danny." Cross Danny felt his face heat up again, but he smiled back. "I will see you around then," he said. "Yes," Kaleth said, "and you will." Danny turned and started walking toward the lift, but he could feel her watching him go. Just before the lift doors closed, he looked back and saw Kaleth still standing in the corridor with her dragons. She was smiling, and her eyes seemed to glow even brighter than before. The lift doors closed and Danny leaned against the wall. He had no idea what he had just gotten himself into, but for some reason he was looking forward to finding out. Danny spent the next 3 days settling into his new quarters and learning the layout of Station Kepler. His room was small, but functional, with a bed that folded into the wall and a desk that doubled as a eating surface. The window looked out onto the docking bay where he could watch ships coming and going at all hours. He reported to his supervisor on the second day and got assigned to the environmental systems maintenance team, which meant he would be spending most of his time in the guts of the station making sure air and water kept flowing. It was not glamorous work, but Danny liked it because machines made sense and they did not care if you were human or alien or something else entirely. On his third day, he was running diagnostics on a ventilation hub in Section 4 when he heard voices echoing down the corridor. He recognized one of them immediately. It was Kalith, and she sounded upset. Danny shut down his diagnostic tool and followed the sound of voices until he found them. In the main corridor, Kalith was standing with her back against the wall while Vera and Sorn flanked her with their heads low and their tails lashing. 3 station security guards stood in a semicircle facing them with their hands on their weapons. Small crowd had gathered to watch and people were whispering and pointing. Danny felt something hot and angry rise in his chest. He walked straight toward the group and his boots hit the floor with deliberate force. "What is going on here?" he asked. One of the guards turned to look at him and his expression was irritated. "This does not concern you, civilian," the guard said. The guard wore a name tag that said Hayes. Danny ignored Hayes and looked at Kalith. "Are you okay?" he asked. Kalith met his eyes and he could see relief mixed with frustration in her expression. "They say my dragons are a threat," she said. Hayes stepped forward. The creatures were observed growling at station personnel. He said, "And regulations require that any potentially dangerous animals be restrained or removed." "They were not growling," Danny said. "And I know what dragon warning sounds are. And that was not it." "How would you know that?" Hayes asked. "'Cause I spent 30 minutes with these dragons 3 days ago," Danny said, "and they were perfectly calm." Hayes looked skeptical. "That does not change the regulations," he said. Danny looked at the other 2 guards who seemed less certain about the whole situation. "Did anyone actually get threatened?" he asked, "or did someone just not like the way the dragons looked at them?" One of the other guards shifted his weight. A passenger complained that the creatures were blocking the corridor. Hayes said, "Were you blocking the corridor?" Danny asked Kalith. "No," Kalith said, "and we were standing against the wall waiting for a group of children to pass." She gestured down the hall where Danny could see a school group disappearing around a corner. They wanted to look at Vera and Sorn. She continued, and I stopped so they could see. "The children were not afraid," Kalith added quietly. Danny turned back to Hayes. "So you got called because she was being nice to kids," he said. Hayes' face reddened. "The complaint was filed and we have to respond to all complaints involving non-terrestrial fauna." Danny took a breath and tried to keep his voice level. "These are not fauna," he said, "and they are sentient beings, and so is she." He pointed at Kalith. "She has a name and clearance to be on this station, and unless she or her dragons actually did something wrong, you need to back off." Hayes looked like he wanted to argue, but Danny could see the other 2 guards exchanging glances. One of them was a younger woman whose name tag read Officer Kimser. She said to Hayes, "Maybe we should verify the complaint." Before taking action, Hayes' jaw tightened, but after a moment he nodded. "Fine," he said, "and we will review the footage. But if there is another complaint," he added, looking at Kalith, "you will need to keep those creatures confined to your quarters." "They are not creatures," Danny said, "and they have names." Hayes ignored him and turned away. The other guards followed and the crowd began to disperse now that the show was over. Danny waited until they were gone and then turned to Kalith. "Are you okay?" he asked. Again, Kalith nodded, but he could see her hands were shaking slightly. "This happens," she said quietly. "How often?" Danny asked. "Often enough," Kalith replied. Danny felt that hot, angry feeling again, but he pushed it down, because getting angry would not help anything. "Come on," he said, "and let us get you back to your quarters." They walked in silence for a while, with Vera and Sorn staying close to Kalith. The dragons seemed subdued, and their scales had lost some of their shimmer when they reached residential, Wing 7. Danny followed Kalith inside. Her quarters were bigger than his, with a main living area and a separate bedroom. There were plants growing in pots near the window, and some kind of fabric hanging on the walls with intricate patterns woven. Into it, Kalith sank down onto a chair, and Vera and Sorn immediately curled up on either side of her. She ran her hands over their scales, and they made soft sounds of comfort. "I am sorry," Danny said, for what Kalith asked. "For how people treat you," he said, "and it is not right." Kalith looked at him with tired eyes. "You do not need to apologize for others," she said. "Maybe not," Danny said. "But someone should." He sat down on the floor near the dragons, and Sorn lifted his head to look at him. After a moment, Sorn moved closer and rested his head on Danny. Danny reached out slowly and stroked the dragon scales. "Why do you do this?" Kalith asked. "Do what?" Danny replied. "Care," she said. "And you do not gain anything from helping me." "Maybe I do not need to gain anything," Danny said. Kalith was quiet for a moment. "In my world," she said, "there is a concept called Velathar. It means seeing the light in another," Danny asked. "Close," Kalith said, "and it means recognizing the worth in another being regardless of what they look like or where they come from." She leaned forward and her silver hair fell across her shoulder. "My people believe that Velathar is the highest form of wisdom," she continued. "But it is rare," Kalith added, "and even among my own kind," Danny thought about that while he continued to pet Sorn. "That sounds like a good way to live," he said. "It is," Kalith agreed, but it requires courage." "Why courage?" Danny asked, because Kalith said, "Seeing the worth in someone who is different from you means admitting that your way is not the only way, and many people would rather believe they are right than admit they might have something to learn." Danny nodded, because that made sense. "Is that why you left your home world?" he asked. "Partly," Kalith said. She looked out the window at the stars. "I wanted to see what was beyond our world," she continued, "and I wanted to understand the species who appeared in our myths." "And what have you learned?" Danny asked. "That myths are always both true and false," Kalith said. She looked back at him and smiled slightly. "Humans are capable of great cruelty," she said, "and I have seen it. But you are also capable of great kindness," she added. "And I have seen that too." Danny felt his face warm. "I am just one person," he said. "Yes," Kalith agreed, "and that is what makes it meaningful. One person choosing kindness matters more than 1,000 people choosing fear." Vera made a soft chirping sound, and Kalith reached out to stroke her scales. "Danny, we have known each other for 3 days," she said, "and yet you have shown me more respect than most humans have shown me in 3 months. That says more about other humans than it does about me." Danny replied. Kalith shook her head. "No," she said, "and it says something about both." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, with the only sound being the soft breathing of the dragons. Finally, Danny stood up. "I should get back to work," he said. "And I have diagnostics to finish." Kalith stood as well. "Thank you," she said again. "You do not need to keep thanking me," Danny said. "I know," Kalith replied, "but I want to." Danny smiled and headed for the door. When he reached it, he turned back. "Hey," he said. "And are you doing anything tomorrow evening?" Kalith tilted her head. "No," she said. "And why do you ask?" "There is a viewing deck on level 12, Danny said, "and it has the best view of the nebula outside the station. I thought maybe you would want to check it out," he added. Kalith's smile returned, and it was that warm, genuine smile that made her eyes glow brighter. "I would like that very much," she said. "Cool," Danny replied, "and I will meet you there at 1900 hours. It is a date," Kalith said. Then she froze and her eyes went wide. "I mean," she started, "and it is an appointment, an arrangement." She tried again. Danny laughed. "It is okay," he said, "and I know what you meant." He left before she could see how much he was smiling. Back in the corridor, he realized his heart was beating faster than normal. He also realized he was looking forward to tomorrow evening more than he had looked forward to anything in a long time. Behind him, through the door, he heard one of the dragons make a sound that definitely sounded like laughter. Danny shook his head and headed back to work. He had ventilation systems to fix and apparently a date to prepare for, though he was not going to call it a date even if that was exactly what it felt like. Danny showed up at the viewing deck 10 minutes early because being late seemed rude, and he wanted to make sure he got a good spot near the windows. The viewing deck was one of the few recreational areas on Station Kepler that was open to all species, and it lived up to its reputation. The entire outer wall was transparent aluminum, giving an unobstructed view of the Helix Nebula that the station orbited. The nebula was a massive cloud of gas and dust in shades of purple and blue, with stars being born in its depths. It looked like something out of a painting. There were a few other people on the deck, mostly couples sitting at small tables or standing near the windows. Danny found a spot near the corner, where the view was particularly good, and waited. Kaleth arrived exactly at 1900 hours, with Vera and Sorn walking beside her. She had changed her clothes and now wore something that looked like a dress, made from fabric that shimmered like water. Her silver hair was braided and wound around her head like a crown. Danny suddenly felt very aware that he was wearing his maintenance uniform, which consisted of gray coveralls and boots that had seen better days. "You look nice," he said. Kaleth smiled and a faint blue color rose in her cheeks. "Thank you," she said. "And you look comfortable." Danny laughed. "That is one way to put it," he said. They walked to the window together and stood looking out at the nebula. Vera and Sorn settled down behind them and watched the other people on the deck with calm interest. "This is beautiful," Kaleth said softly. "Yeah," Danny agreed. "And I come here sometimes after my shift when I need to remember why I wanted to work in space." "Why did you want to work in space?" Kaleth asked. Danny thought about it because he said on Earth everything felt small. He gestured at the nebula out here. "You remember how big everything is and how much there is to see and learn." Kaleth nodded. "I understand that," she said. "And on my homeworld I felt the same way." "What is your homeworld like?" Danny asked. Kaleth's expression became distant, like she was seeing something far away. "It is called Velora," she said, "and it has 3 moons and forests that cover most of the land. The trees there are so tall that you can build entire cities in their branches." She continued, "And some of them are thousands of years old." "That sounds amazing," Danny said. "It is," Kaleth agreed, but it is also isolated. We did not know there were other intelligent species in the universe until your people found us 20 years ago. "What was that like?" Danny asked. "And when humans showed up?" Kaleth laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Terrifying," she said. "And we thought you were gods at first. Your ships appeared in our sky and they were bigger than anything we had ever built." She explained, "And when your diplomats came down to meet our leaders, they wore armor that made them look invincible." Danny winced because he could imagine how that must have looked. "Let me guess," he said. "And humanity did not exactly try to make a good first impression." "Some of your people did," Kaleth said, but others saw us as primitives. They wanted to take our resources and study us like we were animals in a zoo." Danny felt that familiar anger rising again. "Did they?" he asked. "Some tried," Kaleth said. But our leaders refused." "We may not have had your technology," she added. But we had our dignity." "Good for you, Danny," said Kaleth. Looked at him with surprise. "You are not offended?" she asked. "Why would I be offended?" Danny said. "And humanity does not exactly have a great track record when it comes to first contact." "That is true," Kaleth agreed. But most humans I have met do not admit that. Most humans are idiots," Danny said, and then immediately added, "Present company excluded." "Obviously." Kaleth laughed, and this time it was genuine. "You are strange, Danny Cross," she said. "I will take that as a compliment," he replied. "It is meant as one," Kaleth said. They stood in silence for a while, watching the nebula slowly rotate. New star was forming near the center, and it pulsed with blue-white light. "Do you have family back on Velora?" Danny asked. Kaleth nodded. "My parents and 2 younger sisters," she said. "And they did not want me to leave, but I had to." Kaleth continued, "And I needed to see what was beyond our world." She looked down at Vera and Sorn, and these 2 needed to see it as well. She added, "And dragons grow restless if they stay in one place too long." "Are you glad you left?" Danny asked. Kaleth considered the question. "Yes," she said finally. "And even though it has been difficult, I have learned so much, and I have met people who see me as more than just an alien," she added quietly. Danny felt his face warm. "What about you?" Kaleth asked. "And do you have family?" "Yeah," Danny said. "And my mom and dad are back on Earth in the Pacific Northwest." They run a small farm, she added. And nothing fancy, just vegetables and some chickens. Do you miss them? Kaleth asked. Sometimes, Danny admitted, but we message each other every week. Smiled. My mom keeps sending me care packages with cookies even though they usually arrive either crushed or stale. Kaleth smiled. She sounds kind. She said. She is, Danny agreed. And she is the one who taught me to treat everyone with respect. Sounds like a smart woman. Kaleth said. The smartest, Danny replied. A group of people walked past them and Danny noticed several of them staring at Kaleth and her dragons. One woman actually stopped and pulled out her datapad to take a picture. Danny stepped between her and Kaleth. Excuse me, he said, and that is rude. The woman looked startled. I just wanted a photo, she said. She is not a tourist attraction, Danny said, and she is a person. The woman's face reddened and she hurried away. Danny turned back to Kaleth and found her looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. You did not have to do that, she said. I know, Danny replied, but I wanted to. Why? Kaleth asked. Because Danny said you deserve to enjoy the view without being treated like a zoo. Exhibit. Kaleth was quiet for a moment. No one has ever defended me like that, she said finally. Then people are missing out. Danny said. Kaleth took a step closer, and Danny suddenly became very aware of how close they were standing. In my culture, she said, there is a tradition. When someone shows you great kindness, you offer them a gift in return. Danny shook his head. You do not need to give me anything, he said. I know, Kaleth replied, but I want to. She reached up and touched a small pendant that hung around her neck. It was made from what looked like crystal, and it glowed faintly with the same violet light as her eyes. This was given to me by my mother, Kaleth said, and it is a piece of dragon scale crystallized over many years. She unfastened the chain and held it out to Danny. In our culture, she continued, giving this to someone means you trust them completely. Danny stared at the pendant. I cannot take that, he said, and it is too important. Please, Kaleth said, and I want you to have it. Danny looked into her eyes and saw that she meant it. Slowly, he reached out and took the pendant. The crystal was warm in his palm and seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Thank you, he said quietly. Kaleth smiled and fastened the chain around his neck. There, she said. And now you carry a piece of Valora with you. Danny touched the crystal and felt something shift in his chest. Something that felt like connection and understanding, and the beginning of something he did not have a name for. The nebula outside continued to turn and stars continued to be born in its depths. Vera and Sorn made soft chirping sounds that seemed approving, and Danny realized that coming to Station Kepler might have been the best decision he had ever made, even if he had not known it at the time. They stood together watching the stars until the viewing deck began to close for the night. And when they left, Danny walked Kaleth back to her quarters, even though it was out of his way, because that was what you did for someone you cared about. And he was starting to realize he cared about Kaleth quite a bit, even if he was not quite ready to admit it out loud yet. 2 weeks after the viewing deck evening, Danny life on Station Kepler had developed a comfortable rhythm. He worked his maintenance shifts, checking systems and fixing problems, and in his free time he spent hours with Kaleth learning about her world and teaching her about his. They met almost every day, sometimes at the viewing deck and sometimes in the station gardens where Vera and Sorn could stretch their wings in the artificial sunlight. The dragons had taken to Danny completely, and now they greeted him with pleased chirps whenever he arrived. Sorn particularly seemed to enjoy having his scales scratched behind his ears, and would lean into Danny touch like an enormous cat. Kaleth had also begun to relax around him, showing him sides of herself she kept hidden from others. She laughed more easily now, and her smiles came without hesitation. Danny found himself thinking about her even when they were apart, and he had started wearing the crystal pendant she had given him every day. On this particular morning, Danny was running diagnostics in the water recycling plant when his supervisor called him over the radio cross. She said, "Get to Residential Wing 7. Now, there is a situation," Danny asked. "Just get there," his supervisor said, and her voice had an edge to it that made Danny's stomach drop. He grabbed his tools and ran. When he arrived at Residential Wing 7, he found a crowd gathered outside Kaleth quarters. Security guards were there along with several station officials. in formal uniforms. Danny pushed through the crowd and saw Kalith standing in her doorway. Her face was pale and her hands were clenched at her sides. Vera and Sorn were behind her, and their scales had darkened to almost black. Their eyes glowed brighter than Danny had ever seen, and they were making low growling sounds that made the hair on his arm stand up. "What is going on?" Danny demanded. One of the officials turned to look at him. "This does not concern you, civilian," he said. The official name tag identified him as station administrator. Danny ignored Brooks and looked at Kalithar. "You okay?" he asked. "They want to take Vera and Sorn." Kalith said. Her voice was shaking. "They say my dragons are too dangerous to remain on the station." Brooks stepped forward. "Multiple complaints have been filed regarding the creatures," he said, "and we have conducted a review and determined they pose an unacceptable risk." "What complaints?" Danny asked. "That is confidential," Brooks replied. "That is convenient, Danny." Shot back. Brooks' face hardened. "We have video evidence of the creatures displaying aggressive behavior," he said. "Show me," Danny said. Brooks pulled out a datapad and brought up a video. It showed Vera and Sorn in one of the station corridors with their heads lowered and their tails raised. They were making sounds that could have been interpreted as threatening. But Danny noticed something else. There was a man in the background of the video, and he was throwing something at the dragons. Small objects that bounced off their scales. Someone was attacking them, Danny said, and they were defending themselves. "That is your interpretation," Brooks said, "and our experts disagree." "Your experts are wrong," Danny replied. Brooks turned to the security guards. "Remove the creatures," he ordered. The guards moved forward, and Vera and Sorn growling intensified. Kalith stepped in front of her dragons. "No," she said, "and you will not take them." "Miss, we have the authority." Brooks started. "I do not care about your authority," Kalith interrupted, "and these are my family." Brooks gestured to the guards. "Do it," he said. Danny stepped between the guards and Kalith. "You are making a mistake," he said. "Move aside, Cross," one of the guards said. It was Hayes, the same guard from before. Danny did not. "Move. These dragons have done nothing wrong," he said, "and someone provoked them, and you are punishing them for defending themselves." "That is not how this works," Hayes said. "Then how it works is broken," Danny replied. Brooks was losing patience. "If you do not stand aside, you will be arrested for obstruction," he said. Danny looked back at Kalith and saw fear and desperation in her eyes. He looked at Vera and Sorn, who were trembling with the effort of not attacking. He made a decision. "Then arrest me," Danny said, turning back to Brooks. "And because I am not moving." Hayes reached for his restraints, but before he could use them, a new voice cut through the tension. "What exactly is happening here?" the voice asked. Everyone turned to see a woman in a captain uniform walking toward them. Her name tag read Captain Liu, and she had the bearing of someone used to being obeyed. Brooks straightened. "Captain, we are executing a removal order for dangerous fauna." Captain Liu looked at the dragons, and then at Danny. "And Kalithon, whose authority?" she asked. "Mine," Brooks said, "and as station administrator I have the right to remove threats." Captain Liu pulled out her own datapad and spent a minute reviewing something. "According to station regulations," she said finally, "any removal order involving registered companion animals requires approval from both administration and station command." She looked at Brooks. "Did you get my approval?" "Administrator," Brooks' face went red. "This is a security matter," he said. "That is not an answer," Captain Liu replied. She turned to the guard. "Stand down," she ordered. Hayes and the other guards immediately stepped back. Brooks looked like he wanted to argue, but Captain Liu's expression made it clear that would be unwise. Captain Brooks started. "We'll discuss this in my office," she said, "and everyone else is dismissed." The crowd began to disperse and the guards left. Brooks glared at Danny before following Captain Liu. When they were gone, Danny turned to Kalithar. "You okay?" he asked. Kalith nodded, but he could see tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Danny reached out and took her hand without thinking. "It is going to be okay," he said. "How do you know?" Kalith asked. "Because Danny said Captain Liu is fair and she will actually look at the evidence." Kalith squeezed his hand. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "And you could have been arrested." Danny shrugged. "Because it was the right thing to do." he said. Kalith looked at him for a long moment, and then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Danny froze for a second and then hugged her back. Vera and Sorn pressed against them, both making soft sounds of comfort. They stood like that for several minutes until Kalith finally pulled back. "Come inside," she said, "and I do not want to be alone, right?" Now Danny followed her into the quarters, and Vera and Sorn settled down near the window. Kalith sat on the couch and Danny sat beside her. "I am scared," she admitted. "And if they take Vera and Sorn, I do not know what I will do." "They are not going to take them," Danny said. "You cannot know that," Kalith replied. "No," Danny agreed, but I believe it." He touched the crystal pendant around his neck. "You told me this means trust." He said, "Yes." Kalith said, "Then trust me." Danny replied, "And we will figure this out." Kalith leaned against him and Danny put his arm around her shoulders. They sat in silence while the station hummed around them. Hours later, Danny datapad buzzed with a message. It was from Captain Liu requesting both of them to come to her office. They walked there together with Vera, and Sorn following Captain Liu's office was neat and organized with commendations on the walls, and a view of the nebula through the window. She gestured for them to sit. "I have reviewed all the evidence," she said, and including the video Administrator Brooks provided. She turned her screen so they could see. "The full video shows a station resident deliberately provoking your dragons," she said, "and your dragons showed remarkable restraint by not retaliating." Relief flooded through Danny. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Administrator Brooks has been reprimanded," Captain Liu said, "and the removal order has been cancelled." She looked at Kalith. "You and your dragons are welcome to remain on Station Kepler as long as you wish," she said. Kalith's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of relief. "Thank you, Captain," she said. Captain Liu smiled. "Thank your friend here," she said, nodding at Danny. "And if he had not stood up for you, this might have ended differently." Danny felt his face warm after they left the office. Kalith turned to him. "I owe you everything," she said. "You do not owe me anything," Danny replied, "and I just did what anyone should do." "You are wrong," Kalith said, "and most people would not have risked arrest for someone they barely know." She took his hand and her violet eyes met his. Danny cross. She said, "You have shown me more kindness in 2 weeks than most beings show in a lifetime." Danny did not know what to say to that, so he just squeezed her hand. Walked back to her quarters, and at the door, Kalith turned to face him. "Stay," she said, "and please stay with us tonight." Danny nodded. They went inside and spent the evening talking and laughing while Vera and Sorn curled up around them, and when Danny finally left late that night, he realized something had changed between them. Something that felt like the beginning of something deeper than friendship, something that felt like home. He touched the crystal pendant and smiled, because for the first time since leaving Earth he felt like he had found exactly where he belonged.